So what does it mean to learn Torah Lishmah? That's going to be our topic of conversation today. And it's quite an important topic, because it's the ideal version of learning, but it's often clouded in mystery. What does it mean to learn for its own sake? Well, we know what it's not doing. You're not supposed to be learning to gain something. You're not supposed to be learning Torah to get money. There's something problematic there. You're using the most sacred as a way of, digging a hole. Now, that we know is a problem. A person who learns and you say to them, why are you learning Torah? And they'll say, well, because I want to get rich. I want people to respect me. We know that's wrong. We know that's not learning Lishmah. But what about a positive statement? What do we mean by learning Lishmah? So, we are going to go through the 6th chapter of Pirkei Avot from the perspective of Rav Hirsch. I'm Similana, and this is the Judaism from Within podcast. So what do we mean to learn Torah Lishmah? And I think we have to take a step back, because Rav Hirsch's approach, beautiful as it is, timeless as it is, we have to also understand that it's also very valuable, because it applies to any sort of method or discipline of learning. I could be sitting in my Beit Midrash, and I will hear on the left side a group of people going through a Ketzos, a group of people learning Lomdas, discussing chaloises, and discussing zikas, and discussing how one chalois interacts with another chalois, and splitting hairs about interesting chakiras. And then someone else on the other side of the room is learning the second part of the Moreh Nevuchim, going through different propositions and axioms, building up to appreciate the oneness of God. And then someone else who's going through Rav Chaim Vital's Eitz Chaim, based on the work of the Arizal, and splitting hairs about the nature of certain partsufim in relationship to certain sfirot, and how they interact with each other. Now, some of this I might find inspiring, some of it might leave me cold. But any definition of Talmud Torah Lishmah, you'd want it to incorporate all of it. Even if it isn't my, as we would colloquially call it, even if it's not my chill. So what does Rav Hirsch give us? When you are learning Torah, you have to be doing it with 3 things in mind. The first is to understand God's will for you in this world. What is God's will? What is your mission in this world? What are you here to do? The second is to live it out. You aren't learning unless you intend to live it out in the world. And lastly, to teach, to expand it beyond the self. You have sort of a direction from most in to out and then to the rest of the world. Now, how do I do this when I'm learning? Well, if you're learning with the intention of keeping it intellectual, then you've only done phase 1. If you do it with the intention of acting it out in the world, you've done phase 2. If you're doing it with the intention of understanding, acting it out in the world, but also expanding to other people, you stop your Talmud Torah being narcissistic. It's not just about you. Now, how you would fill these 3 stages out would be individual based off the method of learning. But for Rav Hirsch, this is what it means to learn Lishmah. Now, on one level, it's so simplistic, but that, in my opinion, is its beauty. A definition of Talmud Torah Lishmah needs to understand itself, A, as being valuable, as we bless in the morning. We say a blessing before we study Torah. We say, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvah tzivanu. You sanctified us. You were doing this to work towards our sanctification. So when it comes to a definition, you want it to be intuitive. How does this develop a sanctified individual? Well, with this 3-stage process, it's kind of obvious. Of course it does. You're learning with the intent and go through a piece of chumash, of seeing how this, what I'm learning now, affects my standing in the world. How could this be lived out, given the right circumstances? And would I be willing to teach this to someone else? Am I learning it in a way that I'm understanding that it could be taught over to someone else? That's what it means to learn Torah for its sake. It's for the sake of Torah, for the sake of your reason of being in this world. But Rav Hirsch takes one final step. He describes, well, what about you becoming in the process? And it's almost, I see from the end whether the first stage was done correctly. You have to change. Your spiritual and moral self has to be improved. You have to become a better person in the process. Otherwise, it's an external adornment. The example that's brought and developed is like a pig with a gold nose ring. Now, a pig with a ring, well, the pig is, well, no offense to pigs, but it's often used as a filthy animal. But it's got a gold nose ring. The gold ring is external, polished and beautiful, but it isn't part of him. It hasn't been integrated. It's been kept external. That is what we are trying to avoid. The externality of our Torah, keeping it at arm's reach, that's a problem. And then the example that's brought to really bring it all home is the metaphor of a beautiful woman with crass character traits. Now, what's wrong with that? Now, without going into any sort of questions about why a woman, let's move that to one side for the moment. Rav Hirsch understands that when you see beauty, it should remind you of God. It should lead you to the truth. The beautiful, the good, and the true should be one path that you should seamlessly follow. But then when you see that the beautiful isn't good, you don't feel like you traced something wrong and you're disappointed. It's not like you see the beauty and then you see the crassness and you're like, well, I made a mistake. I was expecting to see both physical beauty as well as moral refinement, and I only saw one. No, you feel disgust. You feel disgust because you feel lied to. You feel hidden. A person who is beautiful, but they have no morality behind it, you feel you were lied to. Because when you see beauty in its truest sense, it leads you to God. It should remind you of God. And when you see it doesn't, and the person has a crass, base personality, we recoil from that because we feel tricked, we feel lied to. And the more refined the beauty, the more the revulsion when we find it doesn't mirror in the moral sphere. So we have our two metaphors of illustrating the problem when it doesn't play itself out. When it doesn't play itself out in the world where the Torah has been kept as an external ornament and not been internalized, not changed the person. So our criteria starts in the mind, moves to the action of the body, and then expands to other people. Understanding your role, playing itself out in the world, but then expanding it to others. I don't even think it means you have to start teaching, but when you learn, and this is coming from a teacher, when you learn with the intention of teaching, it's a different sort of learning. It's a different sort of learning, not only in terms of the quality of your learning, but also the refinement. When you're engaged in a noble task, you feel it. You feel it in your bones. You feel that you're doing something noble. When you're learning to connect yourself to your highest goal, the highest good you could connect yourself to, but you're learning with the intention of seeing how this could be left out. You might not always have an answer, but the intention is there. But you're learning it in a way that if you were sat opposite someone, you could teach it to them. That's a different quality, both practically as well as morally. So that's Torah Lishmah. And I want to end off now with a couple of other points that Rav Hirsch develops towards the end of the 6th chapter of Pirkei Avot, where we develop the 48 parts of acquisition of Torah. They're both what develop through the process of learning, but also prerequisites to be a certain type of person to fully acquire Torah. And it goes through a whole bunch of different examples, from being able to teach to be able to articulate. But the three that sort of leapt out to me, or perhaps three that leapt out to me that I thought were interesting: trust in the rabbis, emunas chachamim, giving credit, but also the idea of burdens. Burdens and difficulties as being that which draws you along the path. There's, I think the right way of phrasing this is an inverse relationship between significance and convenience. If something's too convenient, if something is too convenient, you don't feel the significance. And Rav Hirsch points this out, the idea that burdens take us along the path of life and refine us as individuals. Interestingly, the world of AI really is a challenge in that respect, because everything's so easy. It's convenient, but then it doesn't have significance. The idea of giving credit, this is such a big one. You give credit both to the people who you are taking ideas from, but also to your circumstances. Now, this is an idea that Rav Hirsch develops beautifully. And I found what came to mind when I was learning was that when I'm speaking to people who are coming closer to Judaism, and we're speaking, for example, about something I do in Tel Aviv, we're speaking about keeping Shabbos. I tell them, keeping Shabbos for me isn't difficult. That's not my challenge. And it's not because I'm better than you. It's because my environment, my upbringing. It's also not a spiritual refinement. It's just how I was brought up, what I'm used to. Now, I don't want to say that's all it is, but it wouldn't be honest for me to have a conversation with someone who's struggling in an area that for me comes like second nature without acknowledging my background, without acknowledging, expressing, yeah, I can't fully get why it's a challenge, at least in experience, because I'm brought up in an environment in a society where there's a given. Acknowledging that, I find, gives a level of respect, and it levels the playing field in the conversation, that we all have different areas that we're struggling. And because one person's not putting on tefillin, the other person sometimes puts on tefillin, and the other person, every morning they put on tefillin, whether that's an improvement or something good isn't so obvious by the action itself. Giving credit where credit is due, but also recognizing the stepping stone that brought you to where you are now is obviously that which comes before a person can fully incorporate Torah. And then lastly, I believe that was last, we had burdens, we had the idea of credit, and lastly, emunas chachamim. What does it mean to trust in the rabbis? And this is an idea that Rav Hirsch develops in many places, the nature of creativity within a framework, that you need constraints, and without constraints, you can't have creativity. You just have, lostness. Perhaps that's not a word. But the metaphor, the symbol within Judaism for that idea is the tzitzits. We have 1/3 bound up in knots and 2/3 left to hang free. And that freedom and creativity happens within the boundness of the framework. And Rav Hirsch looks at what does it mean to have emunas chachamim? It means you trust in them to give you the framework. Creativity can blossom within the framework, but where are the boundaries? When is it too far? When is an idea being pushed beyond its correct fence? That's what we mean by emunas chachamim. In my own experience, one way this played itself out was Rabbanim I was close to, who I trusted, who I understood their perspective and trusted them as both being bearers of the tradition, but also wise and connected individuals. When I had an idea that I thought was a bit too out there, I would run it by them. I would say, how does this sound? And sometimes they would say, I don't think so. Nah, that doesn't sound right. Why? Because they were the bearers of the tradition. They knew when I had strode out. They didn't build the fences, but they had the emunas chachamim to know where those fences were. And that's what we need. Otherwise, it becomes a free-for-all. And in which case, then you don't have anything. I think that does it for now. Thank you so much for listening, as always, and have a wonderful week.